Good morning. Good morning. According to the NCES 2018-2019 cohort data report, it shows the graduation rates of the classes of 2018-2019. As you can see on your left, it shows the national average was 86%. This is 6% higher than the 80% of African American students that graduated in this class.
Good morning, my name is Samantha Latham.
And my name is Aiden Kuzma.
My name is Howard Miller. Our research question is, how does the low income of African American students negatively influence their academic performance and graduation rates over the last 20 years?
Our argument is that low-income African-American students in public high schools who receive low graduation rate, who receive low test scores, low GPA, and do not participate in extracurriculars have a negative influence on graduation rates.
As in our argument, a factor that negatively impacts the graduation rates of low-income African Americans is GPA, specifically low GPA. As stated by a peer-reviewed academic journal by McKee, it states that, as an overall indicator of students' performance, middle school GPA was also a strong predictor for 9th grade course failure. As students accumulate course grades, overall trends in student achievement are apparent. If students struggle, earning low marks, or even failing classes, the GPA drops precipitously. Low GPA masks academic skills. As shown on this graph provided by nationalreport.gov, it shows 4 main races, African Americans shown below. Now, one can already assume from the 2005 statistic and the 2.3 grade point average that either entitles a C grade average or A's and most likely failed classes. Now, said in previous quote, GPA is a strong predictor for future course failure. So if this trend is allowed to continue, then African Americans will continue to have low graduation rates. Now, there's something called motivation that helps us understand why low-income African Americans generate low GPA. So it is typical for a high school student to want to go to college and finish their high school diploma. However, college is very expensive. As stated by ThinkImpact.com, only 1.5% of students will receive a full scholarship. These are staggering odds for low-income African Americans who are already struggling to provide for the family, much less collegiate level tuition. Another statistic by ThinkImpact.com states that white students have a 14.2% chance of getting a scholarship, while minority students have 11.2% chance of getting a scholarship. Thus, when these odds are stacked up against these low-income African Americans, the motivation to do well in school, GPA-wise test scores, or even participating in extracurriculars is low, thus affecting their graduation rates.
Another factor that can influence African Americans' low graduation rates is low extracurricular participation. So what are extracurriculars? When you hear the word extracurricular, the first thing that you think of is sports. Extracurriculars aren't limited to just sports, but also may include academic clubs such as National Honor Society, creative activities such as kitchen club or arts club, technological skills such as learning robotics through STEM, or volunteering with programs such as Red Cross. There are many factors that can influence extracurricular participation. As stated by Stephens, students who participate in at least one sport each year outperform those who participate in one or less in class rank, overall GPA, and math GPA. This could be affecting low-income students who do not have access to extracurriculars due to their low income. Consequently, African Americans of low income will not have the amount of extra money to pay for extracurriculars such as lacrosse or marching band as used in these examples. Lacrosse has an average cost of $757 and marching band an average cost of $490. Even just the uniform for lacrosse can go from $185 to $420. This could be the difference for low-income families of paying a bill or paying for their students' extracurriculars. A cheaper alternative, on the other hand, would be clubs, with an average cost of $20 per school year. But as stated in the previous slide, more than one extracurricular may be of greater benefit.
And lastly, low test scores negatively influence graduation rates. According to this research from Miners, she discovered that African American students had about an average test score of about 41.63%. This is 13 points lower than the white students she studied. This could be attributed to many things. When we look at the low income of these students, this disparity and divide only goes deeper and longer because these students don't have access to educational resources such as a stable internet connection, which allows these students to perform well on tests. As we can see in this graph from the Great Schools Report Searching for Opportunity, it shows how students performed on California statewide tests. On the left shows how African American students performed, and on the right shows how white students performed. It's based off a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. As you can see on your left, it shows that only 9% of African American students performed well on the test, had a 7 or higher, when compared to the 83% of white students that performed well on these tests. This could be attributed to many things, like I stated earlier. Like Samantha said earlier, she mentioned how extracurricular activities affect the graduation rates of these students. This is because these students aren't able to have access to stuff such as stable internet connection. And lastly, this graph from the NSBA shows how students in the 8th grade, white and African American students in the 8th grade, performed and have an understanding of subjects such as math, reading, and science. As can be seen, the gray shows white students and the red shows African American students. As can be seen under the mathematics column, it shows that African American students only have about 13% understanding of math when compared to the 42% of white students. This could be attributed to many such things. These low understandings of subjects cause these students to have low test scores because they don't understand what's going to be on the exams, which ultimately leads to a low GPA, as Aiden said earlier, and ultimately leads to a low graduation rate. Now, there are other factors other than low test scores, low GPA, and low extracurricular activities that affect graduation rates. One of these being attendance. As you can see in this graph, it shows that if a student has a 60 to 69% attendance rate, they have about a 5% chance of graduating, as can be seen in the red. Compared to the 90 to 94% attendance rate, they have about an 89% chance of graduating. This could be because these students have a job which doesn't allow these students to have in-class instruction, which allows these students to have poor performance on the tests.
Our first solution is scholarship opportunities. With these scholarship opportunities, African American students will be able to participate in more extracurriculars or even have access to a private school education. The limitations, however, are how these scholarships will be distributed, since there's an absence of a system which manages these funds. Also, these funds will be taken away from other programs and schools in the district.
However, our best solution is a redirection of educational resources. These include, but are not limited to, AP funding, textbooks, club funding, etc. These redirection to the low-income areas will allow these low-income areas to catch up to their average income school peers. It will also give better odds of affording college, like as Samantha said. It will also give more scholarship opportunities and resources for these students to achieve their goals. It will also give better security to the student, and as well as the parent. However, there are limitations to this. It is taking away funds from other schools. However, if this is a relocation to low-income schools, it will average out. And there needs to be a district-wide agreement on allowing the relocation. Thank you.
Will all of you take a step that way? Thank you, appreciate it. Samantha, we're gonna start with you. Samantha, can you give me one specific way that your thinking changed as a result of Marcus or Howard, whatever name he wants to go with today, his findings?
He mostly included the differences between races, and I think that before we even had this research question, I never really thought about the differences between African American students versus white, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, etc. Also, most of his research was on low test scores, and I think I thought about more of the SAT versus other things that were attributed to graduation rates.
All right, thank you. Marcus, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to not include in the presentation, and why?
Example one of these perspectives is from Aiden's paper talking about GPA. He mentioned the cultural expectations of the students and motivation and how this impacts their GPA. We decided to exclude this from the presentation because it didn't help us get to our solution.
Okay, and Aiden, what's a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
The solution we did was like the redirection, and that made me think differently because a lot of I thought was like cultural towards and not more of money, but like for example, for Asians, they have different culture values, and if you can see in the statistics, a lot of them were, compared to African Americans, were a lot higher. So I thought it was more culture, but our solution was more money, which made sense because